this is not directly related to budget, but a very important judgment of the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Bench, 9-member bench, where 8-1 ruled that the states have the power to tax mineral rights under entry 49 and 50. And even if, and the petitioners interestingly are Jharkhand, Andhra Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Odisha. And it held that even if you change the application of entry 50, 49 remains. That's the bottom, and that's one of the grounds on which the dissenting judge, Justice Nagaratna, entered a dissent. My question is, it looks very good for states, especially those states with rich in mineral resources. I think it's a healthy development, it looks like. But will it affect, what are the fiscal implications of this? I think it should boost development overall. The central government is opposing it.
Yeah. So, by the way, on this, it is not really a matter of revenue sharing between center and states, because revenue will go to the states in either formulation. The center doesn't tax these minerals, doesn't have the right to. The question is whether the center can legislate a uniform rate of mineral taxation across states. A lot of mineral consuming industries have been in favor of a level of predictability, uniformity across states, so that their production costs, etc., are predictable. But the Supreme Court has given a decision that has to be respected. So this will mean that states can now vary these rates, and you can have a different rate in Jharkhand from somewhere else. And not only that, the government of Jharkhand or the government concerned can change these rates from time to time. So that is the law. So I think that has to be respected, but it doesn't directly affect the fiscal position of the center. It may help augment the fiscal position of some of the states, but what it could also do, and this is the concern which was the center's point of view. I mean, the Supreme Court has opined, it has opined, but I am just reflecting what was the, yeah, it has ruled, yes, agreed. So the point of view from the center was that for the development of the downstream industries which use minerals, it is better to have uniformity across the country, but that has not been accepted by the court.
Thank you. I think there were also some good points in the budget. One on the urban development part of it. In the last two budgets, you have been approaching some amount of urban planning, and this time there was a specific announcement on the development of 14 cities. How is it going to be implemented? The implementation is going to be as important as the announcement. That's one point. Second is there is a lot of customer manufacturing and many incentives are announced. But one of the fundamental things really outside the budget, which is really the unfavorable FTA that India has with ASEAN, and with China was one happening.
Yes.
I think it's going to only become even more adverse with depressed customs revenue as well, and what you mentioned. So how are we going to address that first before really giving more trust for manufacturing? Thank you.
I think the first point was on, sorry, can you just remember?
The urban development.
Urban development, yeah. So on the urban development, see, urban development is primarily a state subject. So the problem that we have, and this is Mr. Ram has spoken about this in a different way, is that how far must a central government go in pushing certain things which are actually state subjects? On the one hand, there is a catalytic role that the center can play in terms of generating best practices and encouraging states to do something which would be good for the country as a whole. So what we plan to do here is that so on the one hand we have certain specific schemes, the much maligned centrally sponsored schemes, which deal with urban development. So there is money there for urban infrastructure, sewerage, water supply, trunk infrastructure in cities, which is a centrally sponsored scheme, which is 60% central, 40% state, but the state chooses how to use the money. So that is our classic proliferating, I claim not proliferating, centrally sponsored scheme. So there is a centrally sponsored scheme called Amrut, which is directly funding states for infrastructure improvement in cities. Apart from that, there are certain conditional grants which are given through the Finance Commission, where if a city meets certain criteria, then grants are given to those cities. The, this is on the schematic side, that is where direct provision of money to execute some projects. But what we are looking at, and which is highlighted in the budget, as you have rightly noticed, is that we intend to incentivize states by saying that here are some planning rule changes which you can make. For example, we have found that many states have very restrictive, I am slightly straying from the topic of urban development, but I am coming to that in a moment. You have planning laws which say that if you want to set up a factory, first it has to be classified as industrial land, okay, that is one. But you have to leave this many meters in the front, and if you have a door also on the side, then that becomes front. So then you have two fronts and all of them have to leave this much of front setback. So if a factory has only one front entrance, then there is only one front. But if it has multiple entrances on sides, then each of them has to leave that much of setback. There is a restriction how much you can build on top of that. So in a very land scarce, land expensive country, we are making it expensive to set up a factory. And this is because of state and local planning rules in particularly. So this year we have a scheme where we give loans to states, 50-year interest free capital investment loans. So one component will be linked to improving the planning regulations to say that you have maximized use of industrial plots without some of these unduly restrictive planning conditions. This will make it easier to get approval. It will also mean that more factory space can be constructed on a given plot of land. I am giving this as an illustration. So there are some policy nudges which we hope to make, partly through consultative processes like Niti Aayog, where we do have a lot of consultative meetings which happen both at the official and the political level. The political ones are sometimes contentious, but behind the scenes there are a lot of official level meetings which actually go very cordially, and in fact at the official level often these are very non-political. So there are means by which these things can be either incentivized or simply by discussion and persuasion many of these changes get done. So we have a list of things that we have been told by experts will improve urban development and industrial development, and we are working on those sets of reforms. And your second, sorry.
How do these conditionalities get enforced?
We have a clear set of guidelines, and the states tell us when they have complied, the nodal ministry says they have done it, we release the money. And on this scheme, every state, including Tamil Nadu, has received substantial amounts of money on this state capital investment loan. You had a second point which was on? FTA with ASEAN, you perceive probably rightly to be unfavorable to us. And the Singapore Consul General is present here. I don't want to comment too much on the unfavorableness of the FTA. I happen to share your view, by the way, personally. I'm not speaking for the government. But these FTAs are not easy to change. So there is a review that is underway, but it cannot be unilaterally reviewed. It has to be a consensual review with both sides. What we have learnt from that FTA is to be more careful in signing future FTAs. That's the biggest lesson we have learnt, and is one of the reasons we have not signed some of the future the FTAs that came after that. But your point is well taken. There is a review on, but it's not a process where we can unilaterally not implement it.
So my comment to you, sir, is on the incentive for R&D, the tax benefit we get. And I would like to confirm that that's a very big incentive and really helps us on the margin invest more in R&D, which is very big for all of us to complete. But unfortunately, what's happening is there's a lot of interpretation on what is R&D between us and the income tax department. And that's getting stuck in litigation for years and years, and that's not having a reverse effect on investments in R&D. And so what we do is, as a matter of prudence, we get MPRD approved by DSIR. But despite the DSIR saying this is R&D, the income tax is
yes.
So my suggestion, sir, is the new income tax.
See, DSIR and income tax department are as independent as the Hindu and the business line.
So, but if you have some DSIR says R&D, then the income tax agrees. So that really helps us.
Generally, I take your point. I wouldn't be able to comment on the specifics of your case. You will have to address it. If you have a representation, do send it. But that will be a specific case where we wouldn't be, I wouldn't like to intervene on a specific, detailed case. But send us that representation. I'll see that it's attended to by whoever is in charge. But I will make this point that we are generally moving away from tax incentives towards specific budgetary incentives, and this new fund yet to be detailed out of 1 lakh crores for R&D is something that you should keep in mind, and eventually bid for or seek money from. There it will not be in doubt because it's a subsidy, it's not a tax concession, and there will be no if it's released, it's released. And that is one of the reasons we are moving away from these tax incentives for R&D, because it has a lot of, it's finally interpreted by an income tax department, which is a tax collecting department and seeks to put as narrow an interpretation on any deduction as it can. Instead, if we move to the expenditure side of the budget, then it's administered by an organization which is doing research and development and which has a more realistic view of what research is. I'm not dismissing your point. I don't have a remedy for you, but certainly happy to look at that.
Over the last few years, we've been seeing a fair success in the PLIs, especially compared to the benefit electronics. We were at $1.2 billion electronic exports, very, very hot. So electronics has been, we've been the biggest beneficiary of the PLI.
Yeah.
We've done really well on that. But my question is a slightly different take on the overall subsidy scheme. Today we have a pretty much unhealthy competition between states and who does a better weak policy. As a state, Tamil Nadu has been fairly conservative in our subsidies. What we promise we disburse. We don't over-promise more than what we can.
Mr. Raghuveer,
You under-promise.
take note.
Do you also under-promise and over-deliver like Dr. Somanathan?
I understand that promise. We promise it disburse. The point is that from a country perspective, how do you see this? This could be not a right allocation of industrial growth by distorting it with extreme subsidies in a way. How do you see?
See, the very fact that we have GST has made it more difficult to compete fiscally than it used to be earlier. Earlier, when you had VAT, you could simply give a VAT concession. Now you actually have to give a budgetary subsidy because the GST doesn't automatically adjust. You will have to give a subsidy by providing a budget subsidy and not by giving a tax exemption. It's a capital subsidy. I agree with you, this kind of, now is this competition healthy or unhealthy? There are two views on this. One is if you are a state which is not industrialized. Tamil Nadu is one of the advanced states, far ahead of many. You can compete on non-financial parameters. But suppose you are a remote state which has no industry. If you say you must compete on non-financial parameters, they can't compete at all. So probably the only thing they can do is compete on the financial parameters. So is it fair to say, on the one hand, as was mentioned here on mineral rights, we are saying states should have the right to decide what they do within the state. Now it's difficult to say that you have no right to give a subsidy from your own budget if your government and legislature decide that that is a good use of public funds. It's a good use of public funds to give free money to this company to bring an industry here. That's a policy choice. It is getting, voted in the budget. If they are doing that, should we say no, we are going to paternalistically say that you must not attract this industry by giving a subsidy. You must only compete on non-financial things where you cannot compete. So it's a little difficult for, it's a tough question. I would say states like Tamil Nadu should compete on their inherent, advantages based on infrastructure, manpower. I mean, you have lots of advantages. And I think you're doing pretty well. All the statistics show that you're doing pretty well. So,
firstly, I want to thank you for the uniform long-term capital gains. That's something I've been writing for the last 4 years about. So I'm one of those who welcome it. What puzzled me in this budget was the sudden softness on disinvestment, not specifically of selling a company, but incremental selling of small parcels of equity holdings of the government. Today, if you notice, promoters of various large groups, small groups, even mid-sized and small-sized companies have shown remarkable agility, taking advantage of the capital market and selling small parcels of their equity, which also tends to cool down the valuations. This is not happening in the public sector companies. And the valuations of public sector companies in the last 2 years have swung from extremely undervalued to, I would say, extremely overvalued.
Say.
Extremely overvalued.
Please don't censor yourself. Go ahead.
I'm wondering why the government is now suddenly showing some reticence in selling parcels when there is a strong investment appetite, specifically in railways.
I will certainly pass on this suggestion to my
And
colleague.
the other point is on land monetization, sir. Why are we not using surplus land of the government aggressively in a real estate market where scarcity is making it difficult to buy land? Why are we not doing that aggressively when the government is the largest owner of land in this country.
No, the two parts of your question, slightly different answers. On the public sector shares, your point is a good point, and I will pass it on to my colleague Mr. Pandey, who's the secretary for Deepam, and I believe they are planning to do it. I mean, it may not have been mentioned in the speech, but this incremental sales are definitely going on, and that will account for a sizable part of our receipts here. On the land monetization, it's a little more complex, because some of the land which we own, I mean, you cannot, if I ask Mr. Vishnu to raise money by selling Fort St. George, now I am giving you just as a typical example. One, it's an iconic place, you can't sell it, you will need to run the government from there. Two, you may not even have title to it, it might belong to the military. So, there are these kinds of, a lot of issues with government land as to who actually owns it. So, if there is a PSU with land, was it granted specifically for a particular purpose? Can it be sold or not? Does it revert to the state government or not? Then you have defense land. Is defense land required or not? So, government doesn't typically have very easily saleable, they have a lot of land. In fact, if we had a balance sheet, if you valued our land at market value, it might wipe out our national debt. Since we are one of those unique entities which only publishes its liabilities and doesn't publish its assets, you think that we are heavily indebted government. We are not. If you value, North Block or Fort St. George or, all of these, you add market value. Perhaps if I had a balance sheet, it might be more than 58% of the GDP maybe are landed assets. I've not done the calculation. Don't hold me to it.
But nice to hear that even government land doesn't have patta, sir.
But we don't need a patta, we give it to ourselves. No, my point is land monetization is something we are working on. It is proving to be hard to do, but something is going on. These things take time to produce results. Your point is well taken.